Hello everyone, welcome to the Summer Academy for Pluralist Economics 2022. This time is online. I wish it was face-to-face. My name is Eleni Papagiannaki. I'm Senior Lecturer in Economics and Political Economy at Birmingham City Business School in the UK. Today's class, actually this three-session workshop will be based on the political economy, on Marxist political economy. And the title is We Cannot Afford Their Peace and We Cannot Bear Their Wars. And we will explore value, exploitation, profitability crisis and rectification. So if you expect too many details or data on contemporary events, you will get some. But the purpose of these three lectures is to dive quite deep into the theory and explore the concepts, of course, bringing contemporary examples. So lecture for today's class is Marx on modes of production, labor theory of value, and the law of value. The lectures, of course, will be face-to-face, but in case people had connectivity issues, since you are around people from around the globe, I offer these as well pre-recorded. So, Marx on modes of production, labor theory of value, and the law of value. This is the content we're going to cover for today. We will go through the philosophy of Marx, and because he started as a philosopher basically, and then he ended up in political economy because he couldn't figure out what's going on there. So we will start with historical and dialectical materialism as concepts, and then political economy as a science, the forces of production, the relationships of production, the modes of production, what are economic laws, and if there are economic laws, the classical political economy versus the critique, use value versus value, concrete versus abstract labor, form of value, functions of money, price versus value, and the law of value. This is important because not every Marxist, surprisingly, agrees on the law of value. They will call it the labor theory of value, or theory of value based on labor, or value theory of labor. So we have seen several strands. So it's quite important that we go through that. So essential reading, all readings are provided through the links here, and if are not provided as are easy to find. So who's Marx? Basically, most people, since you chose this lecture, you chose this workshop, you probably know who's Marx. And one of the many famous quotes he said is, "The philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it." And that was what distinguishes Marx from other philosophers, that he put his philosophy in the service of reality, and particularly of changing reality, not only just describing it. Because from the work we will see, from the content we will see later on, we will figure out how humans shape the world in various ways. So, as I said, theory of value is one of his famous contributions. And the theory of surplus value, the organic concepts like the organic composition of capital, the falling rate of profit, and the inevitability of capitalist crisis. And these are concepts quite important for us to understand today's world. So Marx was also a genius, but apart from genius, was also a product of his era. He lived in a period that Europe was changing, feudalism was collapsing, if had not already collapsed. There were some remnants. German philosophers were at their peak. English, British, generally, political economists also at their peak. The class struggle in France was also at its peak, later on with the Paris Commune. So obviously Marx brought these three things together. So the German philosophy, the French historical analysis, and British political economy. He digested those in a critical way. And what the concepts that come from Marx are dialectical materialism. Of course, dialectics is not Marx's idea, it's basically Hegel. And we go further with Heraclitus, we go back to ancient Greeks. And materialism also is not his own contribution. Heraclitus, Epicurus had some very, very primitive contributions. But this is the first time that we have an advanced and a refined theory on that. And yeah, that's called dialectical materialism. Do scientists today or political economists use dialectical materialism in their methodology in analyzing reality, in their research generally? Well, some yes, they do consciously. A lot of economists or other social scientists do not necessarily, or they might do it unconsciously. You might see a very good piece of work, very dialectical, materialistic, but they do not necessarily acknowledge the philosophy behind that. A lot of economists, usually Marxists today, particularly in the Anglo-Saxon academia, they use critical realism, but not only in the Anglo-Saxon academia. So, and there are works how critical realism with dialectical materialism can be matched, or whether they are mutually exclusive. The other strand of Marx's worldview is historical materialism, watching how systems have changed, basically how the capitalist class overthrew the feudalists, and how soon after the workers already started having struggles. He composed, of course, the concept of historical materialism. You can see it in a simple way stated, but quite clear in the Communist Manifesto. And this is the suggested bibliography for you if you want to understand a little bit, to have a taste of what historical materialism means, how a historical materialistic piece of work looks like. And at the end, of course, he has a critique of political economy after having read Smith, Ricardo, Malthus, and the vulgar economists, basically some of what we know later as neoclassical economists. So he composes a critique of political economy based still on concepts like value. Smith uses that concept. It's not purely a Marxist one. Surplus is a Ricardian concept. It's not necessarily a Marxist one, and several others. But of course tries to compose a unique theory that did not exist before. So what is dialectical materialism? First of all, it's this simple thing. It looks simple. So nature and society, but let's focus on nature because Marx starts a philosopher. His dissertation thesis is on Epicurus. So what is dialectical materialism? Basically is based on dialectics. So one event negates the other, and then we have a new event. Or thesis, antithesis, and the new event, synthesis, and the cycle repeats itself. And of course, one very easy example to understand dialectics in nature is to take a fruit. I mean, pick up any point you want to start with. Pick up the apple when the apple falls on the floor, or the seed falls on the floor, then it starts flourishing, then becomes a leaf, then becomes a tree, then becomes a tree with fruits, and let's go back again. So it repeats. The process is repeating itself. So for Marx it's clear, he can see only chains. There is no way that in nature we don't have chains. And this is what we know so far from physics. As far as I'm aware, although I'm not a physicist, what we know from physics is the constant thing, that something we can take as a default is chains. So it contradicts with pessimistic or nihilistic perceptions. Oh, nothing changes, so just, I don't know, enjoy life or don't enjoy life. So it immediately contradicts with that. So things do change, to the best, to the worst. Let's see. So this is dialectics, but also he marries the concept, he combines that concept with materialism, that matter is a primary, that matter exists first in the universe and then spirit comes, or creatures like humans with ideas and consciousness, that we call that later spirit. So the dialectics based on Hegel, there's nothing crazy, it's just three principles: the interpenetration of opposite forces. So the same force that made the tree grow up is the same force that makes the tree, let's say, become older, etc., etc. The other principle is transformation of quantity to quality and vice versa. So we have many leaves. Eventually, these come together, become a tree, And after the process, eventually this small seed becomes bigger, 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 and then we have, instead of a seed, we have an apple. So how quantity, adding more quantity of one substance can create a new quality. And negation of the negation. So the seed is later negated by the branch, and the branch is later negated by a small or a big apple. I'm not very good at philosophy, so let's just take that as an example. Let's go to historical materialism, that I'm slightly bit better. So applying that concept of dialectics and materialism to history is called historical materialism. So we have forces in society that make a society basically change or metamorphosize. So thesis, antithesis, synthesis. So for instance, we have in ancient Rome, the patricians, they were negated by the plebeians. The plebeians revolted against the patricians. Eventually this gave rise to a new force, the new class, the feudal lords, that they were occupying manorial serfs. We had also eventually revolts of manorial serfs, and together with other reasons, the birth of the bourgeois capitalist class. And eventually every day they're negated, they're contradicting with the interests of the proletarian workers. And according to Marx, this will eventually lead to different change in society. And what he thought, that the next stage in society is a non-class society, because there is not a class remaining to take power. And we will be led to socialism, and when socialism is all around the world, dominant around the world, that will be communism. So we will also explain the difference between communism and socialism. So historical materialism, dialectical materialism, as I said, applied on history. And the main concept, the force that gives birth to new systems, is classes and class struggle. And as we already described, this has taken us through several stages in the history of humanity. Of course, originally we had barbarity, then savagery, according to Veblen. Or how Marx would describe this is as primitive communism, which is a classless society that whenever someone was killing a mammoth, the mammoth was equally distributed among the members of the tribe. Maybe the hunters would take slightly more piece of meat, but there was equal distribution of, not the surplus, there was no surplus, but of the poverty. And when humans start developing their tools, their techniques, and instead of one mammoth, they manage to kill 10 mammoths, they start having the first surplus. And therefore the question occurs, how is this distributed? And this is how we have the birth of class society, that some people, groups of people, or some tribes with better techniques than others will enslave the others. And this is how we have the start of class societies. The first, the antique mode of production based on slavery. Then we have feudalism, capitalism, and socialism, communism. A lot of people from the global south, and not only, will say, okay, come on, what about other systems? This is such a Eurocentric model. And in a sense it is, because Marx was European. Although he was reading a lot of things from other tribes and other systems around the world, he would only have this historical material passing through his eyes, mainly in Europe. In Europe you had this quick transformation of systems. Marx also writes about the Asiatic mode of production. Although it refers to Asia, it was applied in Southern America, in Africa, and of course Asia. There is a book he has written, it's a volume he has written on that, so for those that want to explore more, and it distinguishes between slavery and feudalism in several ways. We may go through that. So if someone wants to see, you can freeze the video, of course, and you can zoom in, you can do whatever you want. So this is a bit more detailed description of historical materialism. So we start from the bottom with the primitive communism, which is classless, and we describe the Technology, it's based on tools for hunting and gathering. Organization of society is usually a small tribe or a big family. Form of property, no one owned land or anyone else. And technology, and distribution everything was shared almost equally. As I described earlier, advanced tools created surplus, and surplus creates class societies, and this is how we have the first passage to the antique mode of production, where technology is advanced to field agriculture, extensive use of animals in agriculture, and advanced trade networks, so more advanced than you can imagine. The form of property is private property on people and objects. There was no issue if you would kill a person. That was absolutely fine as long as they were a slave. You would face the consequences only if this person was a free citizen in ancient Greece or in Rome. So, yeah, the organization of society is cities, like ancient Greek cities, but you also had big entities like the Roman Empire. So it was probably one of the biggest ancient entities based on slavery. What made this change? How we stopped having the slave mode of production and we passed to feudalism? So through that small change, slave owners did not include advanced tools in production. If you go to a Greek museum, you will find pretty amazing and geeky gadgets that they were mainly for display outside the temples, the religious temples, where you worship Zeus or Athena, the goddess, but none of them was implemented in the production. Were the ancient Greeks stupid? Probably not. At least not the lords, not the masters, those who owned slaves. But there were several historical and practical factors that they were using the slaves instead of advancing their productivity with implementing some sort of machinery. And this, of course, continuing having slaves was not sustainable, particularly in Roman Empire. That was a big entity, and for you to be rich you needed to have a lot of slaves, and you needed to have high productivity to feed them, and of course for them to give birth, and this was not sustainable by the system. And since they did not implement new machinery and equipment, or all these inventions that geeky ancient Greek or ancient Roman engineers would invent, so this didn't help, and eventually we have the collapse of the slave mode of production, together of course with the slave revolts. The most famous was one with Spartacus. You might have watched this TV series. It's called Spartacus, I think, describing the life of a slave, of course, and the revolt they managed to have. For the era, it was quite humongous and relatively successful, not the time it takes place, but later on. Usually most revolts are successful, not the time they take place, but later on, the effect they have later on. And then, yes, of course, we pass to the feudalism, where we have technology, highly complex agriculture, things that we don't know, but they knew. I mean, of course, agriculture scientists know these things. With non-animal power devices and intensification of specialization in the craftsmen exclusively producing one specialized class of product, or the guilds, the medieval guilds, as we say. This is where they originate, mainly in Europe, that you have the development of techniques, interesting techniques. The form of property is still private property in land, but not on human, not on people. So if you kill a person now, it's not an object. If you kill yourself, if you're a lord and you kill yourself, you'll face consequences. Not as many as if you were killing another lord, but still you'll face consequences. And the distribution was serfs provided military power, food and services. Serfs are not objects anymore, but they are subjects. They're still subjects. And if you are to work 6 days a week, the first 3 days of the week, you work for the Lord. The rest 3 days of the week, you work for yourself. And the last day of the week, Sunday, is for you to pray to your religious Lord. So, and this is later that we'll see where the concept of surplus value starts with Marx. It's a continuation of systems, basically. The Great Famine, together with the Black Death, and the discovery of the New World. The New World, of course, already existed there, but it's when Europeans discovered it, and together with the Industrial Revolution, all these gave birth to capitalism. Together, of course, as usual, with the revolt of the peasants. There are several peasant revolts in Europe, a lot in Germany, mainly what we call today Germany, and of course France. So technology, of course, in capitalism, we know it. It starts with the steam engine, continues with electricity or automation, etc., etc. Formal property is private in non-labor means of production. Land, of course, not people. People are not objects, but are not subjects either. They have a relative freedom to sell their labor power. Organization, ruling classes, the bourgeois, the capitalist, owning the means of production, which exploits the proletariat, working class, with state, bureaucracy, etc., etc. And the distribution is through the wage and profits. Of course, depending on class struggle, if you have a successful strike, you might get higher pay rise, or if there is a general strike, or even revolts, as we know from the history of capitalism, lead usually to successful distribution of wealth. And what has made capitalism fail then? From two instances of history, it was the World War I that gave birth to October Revolution, but not only the revolutionaries, the Bolsheviks, we existed way before. And the World War II that made the rest of Eastern Europe adopt socialist systems, and in 50s and 60s basically gave birth to all these anti-colonialist movements. Not decolonialist, anti-colonialist movements. There is a difference in concept. And therefore we have, as we know, socialism. Oops, I don't know why it is here. This should be there. Okay, I will change it later. Technology. Yes, they were in competition with capitalism, so they will either develop their own technologies, or they would take capitalist-born ones and advance them. Like, for instance, cybernetics. It was born in capitalist country, I think, United States, but it was developed even more in Soviet Union. Automation, robots, but of course they had so many other problems in technology, particularly with the party deciding against the adoption of certain technologies, although Soviet scientists had discovered quite a lot of them. The form of property, no private property. We have socialized means of production, socialized like health, education, big factories, and collectivized like agriculture. It will not. You had the kolkhoz and the sovkhoz. So the kolkhoz were the collectivized one, and the sovkhoz the Soviet ones, like the committee, the socialized ones. The same with small and medium enterprises, like, I don't know, coffee shops. There were no coffee shops, but I'm bringing examples here. The organization of societies. You have working class is the ruling class. No one is allowed private property, therefore no one can be a capitalist. But there is some literature that says the fact that parts of people there, like members of the Communist Party, will have more access to information, more access to power. This generated a bureaucratic class. So this is quite popular approach. Keep it in mind. I'm quite critical for many reasons, but I'm not rejecting it either. And only if you have socialism, basically in every country in the world, you can go to communism, that there is no state, no borders, no military, and that's a classless society. So this is historical materialism. So let's start now with political economy. So after having 25 minutes almost speaking about the philosophy, because it was essential before we understand the concepts of the critique of political economy. So political economy for Marx is a science. It studies the economic laws. So there are laws. It's not everything in psychology or everything in people's minds. And if we stop agreeing on something, then the economy will, if we stop agreeing that money are representing something, then money will stop existing. So it's not as easy as that. It has, of course, great truth in this, but it's not as easy as that. So there are laws like natural laws, but slightly different because the complexity is different. Humans are advanced creatures. They're not atoms. That if you crush one atom with the other, you have a very, very certain effect. That if you crush one human with the other, you might have friendship, you might have hatred, relationship, you might have exploitation, you might have so many combinations. It's a bit more unpredictable to predict a human. So the complexity is more advanced, but it doesn't mean it's not a science, for Marx at least. So political economy studies and analyzes the most important part of the existence and development of society, the economy. So, and the economic laws for Marx are scientific laws, and they're objective, so independent of our consciousness, whether we believe them or not, they're objective, and we will go through that. They're not dependent on the will and consciousness of people, and Marx actually was quite helpful in revealing the economic laws of capitalism. I would say the law of value, why it is a law and it's not just a theory for Marx, or for myself probably, but for other Marxists it's just a theory. Political economy explains the terms of existence of economy, but also its evolution, and the Marxist political economy reveals the basis of that, which is class struggle. This is where consciousness, class consciousness, people consciously decide to change reality. Not because there are not laws, but because you know that in order to exert or change these laws, you need some sort of class, some sort of a conscious part for these laws as well to be effective. It's similar with Adam Smith, so here I have a little note, similar to Adam Smith's concept of natural laws. So, and it's not alien compared to the philosophy that was quite prevalent in the 19th century. Yeah, if you were a scholar or scientist, you would probably agree with these concepts, with positivist concepts. Although Marx is not positivist, he's dialectical materialist, but it's worth mentioning. My point is, there are no postmodernists here. There is no negation of objectivity so far. So here we start. What is production? And for Marx, production, yes, it's all about labor. So before developing sciences, arts were mixed with politics. So basically, someone will draw into the cave on the cave wall a buffalo or a bison or whatever, and this was at the same time design, planning for economy, but also art. So all these were mixed. Also religion, if the wizard or the head of the tribe was doing this. But of course it started with humans wanting to satisfy their vital needs. They had to work, they had to come together and design and plan and execute work. So what is labor then? So labor is not just a requirement for human life, according to Engels, here the part played by labor in the transformation from ape to man. Labor created human. So it was the very need that when we stood up on our two legs and we had freed our hands, it was inevitable that we start playing with tree branches, stones, etc. and randomly, but also persistently, develop a tool. This is how it starts. It starts as freeing up our hands and developing a new tool. So how we transform from ape to man, of course there's so much work there. I'm not a evolutionary biologist to know the detail, but the most popular approach is, humans had to leave the jungle, had to go to open fields, but because they couldn't see very well, they had to stand up. They would work with the four legs back then, but occasionally they had to stand up to see if there is any lion chasing them. So eventually, the successful ones, those that could stand up more often or for for longer duration, were those that would survive, were those that would check out more frequently that the lion was not coming and they could protect themselves. That's why when these successful humanoids, whatever, mated with each other, they created offsprings that could stand even longer on their own. And of course, that's a process of hundreds of thousands of years, this process of evolution. So yeah, labor created human. So we stood up, we freed up our hands, and then eventually we started from apes that stand up more frequently than the others, or more steadily than the others. We became humans because we started subjugating nature to our needs. So we took the branch, we took the stone, we took a whip, and we binded them together and starting beating other animals or cultivating the land. So labor is exclusively a human activity that aims to produce goods vital for human life. And a lot of people say, why don't bees perform labor, or ants perform labor when they carry all these seeds to have them for the winter? And the answer by many is no, because it's not conscious. It's instinctively developed also through evolution so many years, but it's not conscious. Again, I'm not a biologist. This is very happy to be, critiqued on that. But these were the assumptions that Marx and Engels were based on the science of how science and evolution was developed back then, in the 19th century. So labor is a conscious action, and I think the example they bring is that the worst architect is better than the best bee that designs with precision the hive. The worst architect has at least conceived that in his or her mind before performing any kind of design, but the bee not. So, and that's what distinguishes humans from, one of the things that distinguishes humans from other animals. And of course today we have science pretty much reinforcing this. Basically we know that there are several layers in the brain that leads to different activities. For instance, the reptilian brain, we all have it, is the instincts to eat, to reproduce, to survive, and we all have it. Reptilians have only this part of the brain. Then you have advanced animals, dogs, cats, and monkeys, and the ape family generally, that have the middle brain as well. That is responsible for emotions, hierarchies, who's the leader, I'm going to challenge the leader, the alpha male, the beta males, etc., etc. So they have some kind of social, primitive social understanding. But something that we have very different from other animals, from the most developed apes, is the new brain that helps us to do logical abstract thinking and planning, or I think Michio Kaku says simulations to the future. And this new brain, particularly the prefrontal cortex that is responsible for our social behavior, is just 1.5 or 2% difference of the humans with the other apes. We're still apes, right? The difference is that this 2% in evolution, 2% difference in our DNA, because if you take our DNA, it's 98.5, I think, similar. But this small difference is what made us human, basically. The abstract thinking, planning, and running simulations into the future with our brains, with our minds. So it's not contradicting much to what Engels describes in the Ape to Man to Human book, but of course with the science of 19th century. And here we come, our system. And several times this is described as the pyramid of society, where the basis of the pyramid is economy, or economic base is the forces of production, labor, objects, and means of labor. What's that? We'll go through that very soon. And the economic relations, so basically you are allowed to own private capital, you are allowed to privately to own land, to own property. So the forces, labor, as we call capital or raw material, together with the relations, the fact that it's legal, it is allowed, this consists the mode of production. And based on that we have the superstructure, all the things that slightly independent, not 100% autonomous though, from the base. So politics, mass media, it doesn't mean that politicians and mass media 100% reflect what capitalism dictates, so they are all pro-capitalist. No, there are also, of course, anti-capitalist media, anti-capitalist politics, proposals of anti-capitalist laws, etc., etc. The unions themselves are, in a sense, not all unions are consciously anti-capitalist, but they have this instinct of being at least against the employer, against the interests of the employer. Ethics, culture, what is right to do, what is beautiful, what is acceptable to do. All these are based on a certain economic basis. It is acceptable to own property. So if someone says, "Hey, don't touch my phone," it's perceived as an acceptable statement to say. I mean, normally it shouldn't be. I mean, okay, you have a lot of personal information. It's a different discussion, but yeah, it is acceptable to say, "No, don't touch this. It's mine." And of course, this leads to aesthetics. What is beautiful, what is not beautiful. For instance, it is beautiful in a lot of ads, advertisements, to see a successful man with an expensive watch driving a car with things. So far, this is beautiful. Of course, the fact that aesthetics have some relative independence from the base, there are a lot of people that think, no, that's not beautiful. What's beautiful? It's someone running in the fields with a bicycle and simple clothes, no fancy ones. And at the end we have ideology, the fight of ideas, what is right, what is wrong. There are, of course, liberal, neoliberal scholars, liberal, neoliberal ideologies, and of course there are more socialist ideologies, anti-capitalist, anarchies. You have the fight in the ideas. You see usually so many. It doesn't mean they are not an outcome of the base. Of course, they're an outcome of the base, of the economic base, but they have some relative independence. And each single part of this layer on its turn can affect the economic base. For instance, if the system is not very successful and it starves too many people will think is bad, it's ugly to see another fellow human starving, and they will adopt ideologies that are more, humanist and ecologist, and therefore the ideas they adopt eventually they will impact on the economic base and say, yeah, let's change the economy, let's change what we do. So far, this lecture we're attending right now, it's an example of how ideas or an ideology, I'm teaching you this ideology, can eventually change the economic base. If you all agree with socialism, yeah, let's go for it. Let's change it. So it's an example. It's an example of that. So, but at the same time, we're all products of our system. We cannot be that imaginative of how a new system would look like. So we still have some blind spots, and that's why we're here to explore how many. I'm having for sure blind spots. So very happy to discuss more details. So yes. Continuing with the economy. What is the economy then? Back to we have the forces of production here and the relationships of production. So let's decompose that. Sorry, the forces of production here and the relations of production there. The forces, as we said, are, let's start with labor. It's the human activity that aims to produce goods vital for human life. Experience, knowledge, specialization, scientific techniques, etc. And you have the objects of labor, objects that you can be elaborated by human labor. So cotton, textile, basically the raw material, what we take from nature. You can call it nature, or classical economists call it nature. The means of labor, objects that are used to elaborate the objects of labor. Basically what classical economists call capital. So you have nature, capital, and labor. So very similar to the classical, but of course Marx defines them differently as objects of labor, means of labor, and labor for one reason. Because only labor can produce or can give value to things. We will see that later on. The coal on its own cannot jump into the engine and be transformed into heat or electricity, or the machine on its own cannot be turned on if there is no labor involved. And for Marx, when he's asked the question, how do you know that labor produces everything? His answer is very easy. Look at economic crisis. When millions of laborers are fired, are sacked, what happens to the global output? It's reduced. Does this ring a bell? Yeah, we had a very recent pandemic to also confirm that. So many workers, millions of workers, maybe billions of workers had to stay home. And what happened to the global GDP? So it declined. I mean, it's quite simplistic example, but the point is the machinery was still there, the raw material was still there. The only thing that wasn't there was a worker, and that's why we had this global decline in the output. Give me a second. So yeah, for Marx is all about labor, and for Adam Smith was about labor. Adam Smith was also saying that all the produce belongs to the laborer. All the produce is produced by the laborer. Excuse me. The difference now is that the difference of Smith and Marx was that Smith said, yes, all the produce is produced by the laborer, but the capitalist is kind of necessary evil, because it's the capitalist that will bring the workers together. We will have division of labor, specialization, and therefore will produce this outcome. So for Smith, it was basically they agree with each other. The difference is how necessary Smith perceives the capitalist and how unnecessary Marx perceives the capitalist. At least he thinks there can be a system without them. Yes, as I said, mainstream economics, labor, land, capital, and labor. And yeah, these are the means of production, the objects and the means of labor. They consist of the means of production, and together with labor, the forces of production and their interaction. And of course, as I said, this is the basis of the relations of production. The relations is developed in the sphere of production, exchange, and distribution. They're determined by the ownership of the means of production. So it is legal. It is legal in this system to own means of production. In a different system, it wouldn't be legal. It is legal to produce for profit. Even in feudalism, it was something condemned by the god to produce for profit. It's a different thing having a little surplus to cover your basics, but if you were producing for profiteering in feudalism, it was something disgraceful. So, but today it is acceptable, it is legal, and not only it's legal, it's culturally it's perceived as normal. And few people say that's not good. Most people think it's also aesthetically acceptable. So in capitalism, yes, means of production are individually owned by capitalism, and the working class is operating them. So we have a system of classes defined by the relationship. So what is a class? Again, everything is defined to the relationship of the means. I think I saw something interesting on Twitter, but I cannot find it and remember who wrote that. But yes, I'm trying to cite the anonymous user of Twitter that says, labor produces everything, but isms like feudalism, capitalism, socialism says who's taking the produce of labor. So what is a class? Is a relationship to the means of production. The workers operate the means of production, always operated the means of production in feudalism, in ancient societies based on slavery. But the isms is which class is taking the surplus and which class is legal to take the surplus. So what class are you? I'm asking individually each one of you. Try to reflect your relationship with the means of production. If you own factories, big shares, etc., probably, yeah, you own parts of means of production. You're upper ruling class. If you don't own anything apart from your labor power, your hands and your brains, then you're probably working class. If you maybe own a house here or a small fish and chips business or whatever, you're petite bourgeois middle class. So okay, it's more complicated than that. I have a paper that I've written on what is class, who is in what class. But yeah, the main thing is the relationship with the means of production. And why is this important? Because the relationship with the means of production defines what is value and what is not value. There's a lot of literature saying that value doesn't exist in socialism because there is no private ownership of the means of production. So what is value is linked directly to ownership. So let's try to dive into that. Commodities exchange. A lot of Marxists will start from here. So if I was this kind of Marxist, I would start from here. I wouldn't have started from dialectical materialism, historical materialism, means of production, ownership, relationships, etc. I would have started from here if I wanted to talk about the practical things. But according to my opinion, that shouldn't be the case. That shouldn't be right. Let's start from the basics then. Actually, let's start diving into the basics. So what is good and what is commodity? I mean, this is something we probably know even from mainstream economics. Something is good if it's free, if there is no necessarily exchange for that, for another object. So when, whatever, John gives flowers to Mary for a gift because it's beautiful, whatever, because he likes her, this is just a good. Flowers are just a good. Or if they walk in the jungle and grab the fruit, gives it to her, it's a good. Now, I know what you're going to tell, but he might expect something in exchange. Yes, but that's a different story. If there is a direct exchange with another commodity, here with money in this case, then it becomes, sorry, if it is exchanged for another good in terms to satisfy needs, then it starts becoming a commodity. So good is anything that is useful, we derive pleasure from it. It means it's not bad. Commodity is good for exchange. So here, commodity is the relationship that this thing has with other things. And that's a distinguishable point. So one, we use flowers to smell them because they're amazing. Or even if John doesn't give them to Mary, even if Mary just grabs a flower from nature and smells, it's amazing. So it's just a good, it gives her pleasure. It's useful in a sense. And if she buys it with exchange of money or exchange of services, etc., etc., it becomes a commodity. So two people exchange with each other. Commodity represents a relationship between social beings. It has a social component. So it's not a random flower coming to be exchanged with £5 or a random book to be exchanged with a bowl on their own. It represents a relationship, something that humans need. So it has a social component. Exchange has a social component. It's what humans do. Commodity is good with a good. Commodity is a good which connects people through a concrete economic relationship, the relationship of exchange. So commodity is a relationship. Of course, it has the physicality or tangibility of a good, but it's mainly a relationship. And that's the difference between Marx and other mainstream economists, that mainstream economics will see relationships among products, so one product exchange with the other. But Marx will discover that no, in fact, it's a relationship among humans, and he goes way deeper on that. But that's the main difference. And here he focuses on production, and what is a commodity production then? It needs to have a purpose. If it doesn't have a purpose, if it is instinctive, it's not necessarily commodity production. For here, this little dog feeding this little lamb is cute, apart from a cute picture. It doesn't show a purpose. Maybe the shepherd instructed the dog to do that, but it's not a conscious exchange of services here. So is commodities exchange a universal or a human activity only? Marx says it's a social phenomenon. It requires social interactions. It cannot happen in animals. Any possible exchange the animals may have is based on instinct. Or maybe because humans instructed or trained them. So was commodities exchange always existed in history of humanity? The answer is no. Humans, okay, they say 1 million years ago humanoids, but it's 100,000 years ago. The humans that are more similar to us today. But commodity exchange is a relatively recent phenomenon of humanity, only 5,000 to 6,000 years. Now, know what you're going to say? Yes, but these are our more developed years, our most developed years. So why should we cancel exchange? So, no, we shouldn't cancel exchange, but probably we should cancel this kind of exchange. But we will come to that very, very soon. So primitive communists had never commodities production. The fact that there was no ownership means everything was equal. It was no commodity. Nothing had to exchange with anything. So what does enable then commodity exchange? Why is not any exchange commodity exchange? So there are, for Marx, economic causes that give birth to commodities production. One is the social division of labor. If we don't divide our labor, if I'm not specializing in fishing, you're specializing in hunting, the other is specializing in gathering, the other is specializing in cultivating the land, there is no point. If there was not this division of labor, there was no point of exchanging. The fact that I specialize in fishing means I have some surplus of fish, so I will eat a couple of them, but now I want to eat the fruit, so I have to exchange with the farmer. Later I want to eat a chicken, I will exchange with the other farmer, and etc., etc. So it starts when people start dividing their labors, and they divide their labors because it's more efficient to produce. When each one is specializing in one thing, than me doing everything, me doing the fishing, me doing the hunting. It's impossible one human to do everything. So it has to be some humans to specialize on something in order to achieve this surplus. And once we have the surplus, we need to exchange. So one necessary condition for commodities exchange is social division of labor. Hunter-gatherer, farmer has to exchange with the farmer and the fisherman, as I said. And there is a continuous interdependence of laborers. Tailors need to exchange his clothes with farmers and vice versa. And the other important criterion, because social division of labor might exist the next 100 years at least, before we invent the replicator that they will do it on their own. So social division of labor will exist for a few centuries more, but something that will not exist and not always existed, but exists now, is individual ownership over the means of production. So this is where the different products that the hunter, the farmer, the gatherer produced become commodities, when they own privately the land or the shop they have or whatever. There have been societies with division of labor, but not with commodities production. And Marx brings the example of an Indian village. Back then it was contemporary of his, a village in, it's an ancient one, an ancient India that had division of labor and goods exchange, but not commodities exchange, because that was not based on private individual ownership. So no one owned the land. It was like, I assign you to gather the fruits. You don't own the tree or the land that the tree is on. Or I assign you, the society, the division of labor assigns you to kill the animal because you are strong or whatever, or ruthless. But you don't own the animal. So there is an assignment of duties, a social assignment of duties, but there is no ownership. And when these people exchange the fruit with the animal, etc., etc., this is just goods exchange, not commodities. It will become commodity exchange as soon as they're allowed to have individual property. So the exchange was communal. Goods exchange is not commodities exchange. So this is the society I envisage, that each one of us will be specialized on a thing, services or product that we produce, and we will exchange. We will still exchange with each other because we have to, and before the replicator is invented. But no one needs to own these means of production. I don't need to own, I'm a teacher. I don't need to own the university or the laptop individually. Someone else can use it, as long as I can still access the notes I have created, etc., etc. Or if I fancy fruit from your tree, it shouldn't be your tree. It's a tree. I should just grab a fruit and eat it, as long as I don't waste it. So as long as they are treated as goods and services, we should all be okay with that. So communal exchange, not commodity exchange. So therefore, we need individual ownership for commodities exchange. That's very, very important. But it is underestimated in neoclassical economics, especially because they say, come on, humans always exchanged. Humans always had capital. No, these, what Marx called them, vulgar. No, there are distinctions. There was exchange, but it was communal. it was goods exchange, not commodities exchange. That's why you will see neoclassical economics still using the word good. We exchange to goods. No, dear neoclassical economists, you say we exchange to commodities. That's the correct term. Do not exchange to goods. Two goods are not to be exchanged in the market terms. If they are to be exchanged in market terms, they become commodities. And here is where Marx distinguishes between use value, the usefulness of the thing, use value, and exchange value. The use value is the ability of goods to satisfy human needs. So when I eat this apple, it satisfies my hunger. But if I'm to exchange it, if I've eaten too many apples, I've produced too many apples, and I'm craving some banana, yeah, this is where it becomes an exchange value. So Marx distinguishes the use value with the exchange brackets value. But this is not a new concept. Adam Smith used that, medieval scholars used that, even Aristotle from ancient Greece said there is value, the usefulness, and something that can be exchanged for. So it's not a Marxist concept on its own. The distinction between value and use value is not a Marxist concept. So the exchange, as we said, the ability to be exchanged with other things. So not all use values are commodities. As we said earlier, spring water is a use value, is useful, but not a commodity. As long as a capitalist hasn't privatized the spring, this is not a commodity. So when do use values turn into commodities, into values? Again, when it's product of labor. If it's just product of nature, like the spring water, is not a value. When it satisfies the needs of producers and humans, when the producer needs to drink water and humans, but and given as an exchange for another good, not for free. So there's a lot of literature that says capitalist appropriates nature, which is true. They go to free things that they're not produced by labor, and they eventually impose, they transform them into commodities. That's a different discussion now. Let's continue with the basics. So basically, for the use values to turn into values, we need to be product of labor, satisfying needs, and being exchanged with other goods. So here we are in the example. So we have one car, one expensive car, let's say, being exchanged with several. Okay, here I'm showing my age, Nokia 3210s. I don't know if anyone remembers that. It's ancient mobile phones from the very, very long past. So value is the ability, as I said, for one good to be exchanged with the other. So one car with 50 mobile phones. And these are products of human labors. The amount of human labor needed to be used to produce them is what equalizes them. And this is the tricky part that even a lot of Marxists do not agree on. Okay, how is this possible? How is the painter's job equalized with the doctor's job? How can this be? How can this happen? And here comes Marx's own contribution. Marx says it doesn't have to do with the skill of a certain job, one being more skilled or unskilled, although he has a discussion on skills, it's a different concept. It doesn't have to do basically with the concrete labor, but with the abstract labor. Concrete labor is a human labor as a particular activity that has specific useful effect. The painter with his brush does this on the wall, will make the wall yellow. Fisherman, a teacher, so different skills, different knowledge. How can this be equal? How can me as a teacher, my output can be equalized with 5 kilos of fish? So it can. How though? Not through concrete labor, because it's impossible to compare me with a fisherman. You might say, I'm more educated, so I should be of higher value. Yeah, but the fisherman, that's quite more essential, probably. I mean, it's immediately more useful to eat than to be educated. Again, all things are useful, but yes, how can this be equal? And Marx says they are equated through abstract labor. It's the human labor in general as economically valuable work time. Any kind of labor is an expenditure of human energy, effort. With Engels, they even speak about calories. So I need to eat a sandwich before I start teaching. The same with fishermen. So for me to teach 3 hours a day, I will probably spend the same amount of calories with the fisherman catching 5 fish or 5 kilos of fish. So there is something that equates those two. It's the expenditure of human effort that enables humans to exchange the fruits of their efforts, the commodities. So not the specific labor of the doctor, the musician, the boxer, the painter, because this becomes an inevitable problem to solve, but it's the abstract labor. The labor in the general effort we have to spend. This is what gives value to this product. Or to put all these pictures in one together, you have use values. This is what we see, right? We all see a car, we all see a mobile with corn and money, right? They all come from specific workers, the painter, the mechanic, the whatever. This is concrete labor. But all concrete labor contains abstract labor, that all of these humans expended some certain amount of energy. And this is what equates one value with the other. I'm coming from a village in Greece. I'm not going to say the story of my life, but I'll give an example. And I would remember that we will give to the neighbors a dozen of eggs, right? And next day, because we had chickens and they were producing eggs, they were giving birth to eggs. So we had surplus, so we would give a dozen to the neighbors occasionally. And the neighbors would come the next day or the next week, it doesn't matter, with 5 big bags of vegetables and everything. I say, that's unfair. Unfair for them. I mean, they give so much than we do. And I asked them, I say, this is so much. Isn't this unequal? And the answer was of my mom and my auntie, the neighbor, whatever, that I spent, let's say, that much money and 1 day's work to make the chickens give birth or whatever, or to raise them. Or I spent 5 days to raise them, and she spent equally 5 days to make sure the vegetables grow properly. So they expressed this exchange in terms of working time or cost, the cost that it was invested in working time, how much work they invested on that process, and this is what enabled their exchange. So yeah, I spent 3 hours on doing that. I also spent 3 hours for these vegetables, so yeah, this is what made them exchange. And back then still made some sense, but still was a bit confusing. And that's Marx's contribution. The socially necessary working time. What makes all these things equal? Value expresses the social, not the individual conditions of production, and values expressed only by socially necessary labor time. Or as Marx says in Volume 1, Capital, SNLT, or socially necessary labor time, is the labor time required to produce any use value under conditions of production normal for a given society and with the average degree of skill and intensity of labor. So basically, my mom is a skilled person, my neighbor was also a skilled person, and the level of technology was the same. They were all in the same neighborhood, basically. But what was different was the amount of labor times they had to invest on the production of a dozen of eggs, and eventually they managed to exchange with equal labor times. So here was an example, contemporary example. Society needs, let's say, 100,000 cars for 2017. That's an old slide I have. Coincidentally, all the car industries for 2000 have produced 100,000 cars. So basically we say supply meets demand here. That's the assumption. So a BMW employee spends 4 hours per car, not because they are more efficient than the others, but this is the technology that BMW has, the BMW factory has. And now the employee spends 5 hours per car, a Ford employee spends 6 hours. So what is, very crudely here, we use this example very crudely, what is socially necessary labor time? It might be probably the average. It's the average degree of skill and intensity of labor prevalent in that society. So this is how empirically we tend to calculate that. Any questions? Save them with for the live session. And here we are, how value is expressed in different forms. So this is the value form, or the form of value. A simple form of value is X quantity of A is worth Y quantity of B. Or as I said, a dozen of eggs worth 5 bags of vegetables. There is the expanded form of value, that X amount of A worth Y amount of B, and Z amount of C, and goes on. This is the expanded, that it's not only 2 commodities, but 3 or more. We have the general form of value, that X amount of A, Y amount of B, Z amount of C, and goes on. They're all equal with one universal equivalent, the U quantity of F. Today, this is money. Few centuries ago, or many centuries ago, this was in ancient Rome salt. In Mesopotamia, in ancient Mesopotamia, this was shells. So this was the universal, the general form of value. Salt in Roman times, gold until recently. And we have the money form of value, what we are a bit more used to. We see it every day. X amount of A, Y amount of B equal to U amount of money. And in Marxist terms, X amount of product, Y, quantity of average is X amount of product, A, is Y quantity of average labor hours. So this is our the general commodity. This is equal to Z quantity of gold or money. So even in today's economy, it's not a relationship between a commodity A and a commodity B that can be money. It is an exchange of a commodity A, B, but mediated by something that is called labor hours. Is labor hours the amount of labor invested in the process for this product to be produced? And since money is also a commodity, we will see why it's not just a mirror of the economy, it's not just a mediation, a means of exchange. It does have its own value as well, because it's a commodity. We will see that very soon. But all these are mediated by labor. So it's not a relationship among products, it's a relationship of products mediated by labor time. And as we said, money is an object which can satisfy some human need or serves a useful purpose. So money has a use value. It's useful for something. It can satisfy human needs or serve a certain purpose. For Romans, this was salt, contemporary gold, currency note, plastic, Bitcoin, other currencies, a form of value developing with commodity production. But what is the substance of money? Does it only have a useful side, or is it only having a useful side, or there is a substance there? For Marx, we'll say yes, there is substance. It's a commodity. It's not only a use value, it's a commodity that fulfills a certain social role, the role of general equivalent. So the physical appearance of a commodity is directly observable, but the means of its social form is not. We can all see money, we can all see apples, we can all see oranges, we can see why they're useful for, but we cannot understand their social form. We can understand how much labor it needs for them to be produced, or for money to represent this social role, the role of general equivalent. And this is where Marx brings his analysis of money. If you're interested in the money topic, you can go for it. And he says there are 5 functions of money. The one is value measurement, as we said, X, Y of product A, Y quantity of average labor hours, and Z quantity of gold money. It's also a medium of circulation, which means we don't need, if I have apples and you have bananas, we don't necessarily need to exchange on the spot. So if I have apples, I will just sell apples and buy bananas another time, or not buy bananas, buy trousers. So it's a medium of circulation, which means it breaks this process, the CMC process. Commodity, money, buying a new commodity. We don't need to do that, me to exchange my commodity with someone else's commodity. It breaks the process. So I can sell my commodity and take money, and later on I can use money to buy a different commodity. Oops, here I miss an accent. Yeah. So the first metamorphosis is when commodity transforms to money, and the second metamorphosis when money is transformed to a second commodity. So in different times and spaces, we do not need to buy another commodity immediately after selling the original. And that's an interesting one. The medium of circulation is what enables also societies to experience crisis. Because it's when, let's say, capitalists sell too many products, they sell, we buy. They have saved a lot of money, but they have not invested them in new ventures. So I'm not saying money is responsible for crisis. I'm saying money enables also crisis to happen because it breaks the circulation, the circulation of commodities exchange. So that's also a useful thing to take into account. It also means of hoarding, since money can become the whole circulation process from CMC to CM and MC. We can save that money from CM. As I said, a lot of capitalists have more savings than investing in the process, and this is usually characteristic of Western economies. They have way less investing than saving. It's also means of payment. As we said, CM, MC has been separated by an interval of time. Yes, it achieves MC second metamorphosis before CM, the first metamorphosis. It appears as we buy without needing to sell anything before. Therefore, money acts as a means of payment, of course, and as a universal money. So if we trade between the markets of the world, we use the value of a certain commodity. So it acts as a universal exchange. So far, we have laid the foundations of what is value, what is use value, what is exchange, and now we will end up with the law of value, or you can still call it labor theory of value if you're not convinced. What is labor theory of value? Here we are. Is when everyone sees prices, Marx sees values, lambda I. So the price of a product I is its value, but not exactly, discounted by the value of money. So when Marx says everything we see is labor times, it is. But you also need to take into account that money plays a role in this exchange. This is not... It has some similarities to Smith, but Smith could never conceive it 100%. Smith could conceive value, product, general values produced by the worker, but then when it came to the price of a product, he thought it's what the worker takes, what the capitalist takes, and what the landlord takes. He couldn't link his L value with his price, the price of a product. So Smith had very similar concepts to Marx, actually laid the foundation before Marx brings them together. So Smith had a theory, sort of theory of value, quite primitive, had theories on prices, yeah. But the person that brings those two together in one single equation, we love equations, we're economists, right, is Marx. So by expressing that the price of a product is the value, basically the labor time this product contains, and the value of money. This is equation I'm using with my research very often. I will have a working paper soon uploaded if you want to see. I mean, there's so many examples of this, or let's say Simon Mohun has examples of the UK and the USA economy expressed in price and values and the value of money. So there is a lot of bibliography to see how this relationship is not just an abstract theory, a concept that is not necessarily proven or is not applied to reality. In fact, it is. There are so many not many. There are a lot of Marxists in economic Marxist economists in this world that try to apply this kind of formulas and describe the economy quite well and predict it quite well. So this is the fundamental relation for Marx that describes the commodities, prices, values, and value of money. So for Marx, money is not just a mirror. It mirrors what happens. It's just a medium. It has its own usefulness, so it's a commodity as well. And if you want to take this and take the price of the CPI, let's say, the Consumer Price Index of an economy, for a year, and take also all the labor times, all the workers, how many times they worked per hour, population in the world, you will find how much is the value of money. So it's an exercise for you to do now if you want, as long as you have access to data sets. It's something you can practice yourselves doing. So you can find the CPI, the Consumer Price Index. You can find how many workers exist in your country, probably how many hours they have worked for the year, each one of them. Multiply, find the total hours of all workers and the price index, and then you'll find the value of money. I'm doing it very often in my research. All reverse this relationship, you have the MELT, the monetary expression of labor time, the MELT. It's basically the same ratio, the same fraction. And that's the law of value, the very basic, fundamental statement of the law of value. And you can, as I said, exercise, practice yourselves if it's easy, and you will find something like this. You will have the CPI, the Consumer Price Index. It might be 1.05, and after doing calculation with the working hours, if you find that the value of money is bigger than 1, it means the sellers have more in stock than buyers. Prices eventually drop below value. But if you take the calculation of values and prices and you find that the value of money is something less than 1, means the sellers have less in stock, more than buyers need. Is this why we have inflation now in most countries? Because we have lower stock for disruptions in the supply chains due to oil and petroleum, etc., etc. Is this approach of Marx valid then, at least with this with the reality? I would say probably yes. And these are very simple maths and generally easy data to take. I mean, particularly for countries like the US and the UK, these are easy data to access. And that's how we conclude. This is the law of value, the fundamental regulator of commodity production based on private ownership. It's not just a theory for me, for Marx, and for me, and for many Marxists, it's not just a theory. It is a law. I can use these maths that describe the world quite well. Go practice yourselves as well. And what are the implications for new forms of money like cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin? Do they also express a form of value or universal equivalent? Or so ask yourselves if you're interested in a topic like that. But the law of value existed before capitalism as well, and it might exist for a few years after capitalism in a socialist economy. But what is peculiar to capitalism and the law of value? The peculiarity is that the law of value is generalized to the degree that transforms into even labor into commodity. So not the apples, not the bananas, but now labor transforms into commodity. And this law of value gives birth to the law of surplus value. And this is a uniquely Marxist concept that we will discuss in the second lecture, lecture 2. So far we just laid the foundations. It was long, full of information. This lecture, you can pause any moment. And here I have comparison between the classics, what they have in common with Marx, and what are the differences between classics and Marx in their analysis, and also the differences between the Ricardian concept of value and the Marxist concept of value. Because Ricardo still sticks with the concrete labor, not the abstract labor, and this is where we have a lot of neo-Ricardian contemporary critiques of Marx. They don't like the concept of abstract labor. And this is what we will discuss next week, how the simple commodities production that other systems had, like feudalism, slavery-based society, is different from the capitalist commodities production. And the differences are that instead of producing a commodity to exchange it with another commodity, now we have money, we exchange it with a commodity we don't even care in order to get more money. So this is what changes in capitalism. And of course, we don't have any more personal labor, but we have wage labor. But these are things we're going to discuss next in the next session, in the next lecture. So that was the topic for today. Lecture 1, Marx on modes of production. We covered it, labor theory of value and the law of value. So whether you agree if it's a theory or a law, I'm happy to discuss in our seminars. And we covered basically the very first part of the workshop, which is value, before we move to the rest: exploitation, profitability, and rectification. It was quite essential to understand these, how the world works, what value is, and before. So basically to show you what kind of bricks we're going to use to build the rest of the concepts in the next couple of lectures. I hope you enjoyed. You can pause any moment and revisit, and I'm very happy to answer questions. Thank you.